It seems so simple, right? Measuring what people want. You just look at what they buy. But for decades, economists were kind of stuck. They could see what people were buying, sure, but their models couldn't really explain the why in a way that lined up with their own core theories about rational behavior. This is the story of how one groundbreaking paper finally cracked the code. And this is the fundamental question. On one hand, you've got these elegant, beautiful economic theories about how a perfectly logical person should act. But on the other hand, you've got this messy, chaotic, real-world data of what people actually do. So the huge puzzle was, how do you build a bridge between the perfect theory and the messy reality? For a long, long time, the approach was pretty much what you'd guess. You look at prices, you see how much stuff people bought, and you run a statistical analysis to find a pattern. Simple enough, right? Well, the problem was this method kept spitting out results that just didn't make sense. It was like treating the market for coffee as a totally separate universe from the market for tea, ignoring the fact that a choice you make in one absolutely affects the other. And that gets us right to the heart of the conflict. Economists had these incredibly logical theories about how consumers are supposed to work. But when they used their simple models to look at the data, the numbers, well, they didn't follow the rules. There was this massive, frustrating disconnect. See, in economics, the whole idea of a rational consumer isn't just a casual suggestion. It's basically the rulebook. It lays out these really strict, non-negotiable rules for how any logical person's spending habits have to behave. So if you want to build a model that actually explains something, your numbers have to play by these rules. Let's walk through the three big ones. First up, the adding up rule. This is just pure common sense. All the money you spend on food, rent, clothes, coffee, you name it, it has to add up to your total budget. You just can't spend money you don't have. It seems obvious, but any realistic model of demand has got to respect this basic fact. Second is a thing called homogeneity. Now, this sounds a little academic, but the idea is actually really simple. We react to real price changes, not just the numbers on the sticker. So imagine if every single price in the world doubled overnight, but at the exact same time, your income also doubled. Your actual purchasing power hasn't changed at all. You're not any richer or poorer. So a rational person shouldn't change what they buy. Your behavior should be homogeneous or unchanged. And third, we have the trickiest one, symmetry. This rule is all about consistency. It basically says that if the price of coffee goes up and that makes you buy more tea, that effect should be a mirror image of what happens if the price of tea goes up and makes you buy more coffee. It's a two-way street. It proves that your underlying preferences, how you trade off one good for another, are stable and rational. So here's the bottom line. The old way, looking at each product in its own little bubble, constantly broke these fundamental rules. The numbers just didn't play nicely together. The new goal for economists, the holy grail, was to stop looking at these separate islands and start building one single interconnected system where all these rules were baked in from the very beginning. And this is where the hero of our story, Angus Deaton, enters the stage. In a landmark 1974 paper, he came forward with a solution that would finally bring the messy data and the elegant theory together into a single disciplined system. Now, I know what you're thinking. This quote looks a little dry. But trust me, in the world of economics back then, this was an absolute bombshell. After decades of studies that found this frustrating gap between theory and reality, Deaton comes along and says, hey, you know what? When you model it the right way, people do actually follow the theory. This was a huge, huge deal. So how on earth did he do it? His big idea was a complete shift in perspective. Instead of running a simple analysis and then checking afterwards to see if the results followed the rules, which, spoiler, they usually didn't, he built the rules of adding up, homogeneity, and symmetry directly into the mathematical DNA of his model. The theory wasn't an afterthought anymore, it was the entire foundation. And to prove that his new method actually worked in the real world, Deaton took on an incredibly ambitious test. He didn't just grab a few years of data. No, he applied his new model to a massive data set covering 70 years of consumption in the United Kingdom. Just let that sink in for a second. 70 years. We're talking about a period that included 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the rebuilding after the wars, and just massive social and economic upheaval. If the theory of the rational consumer could hold up across all of that chaos, it would be a powerful statement about economics itself. And he wasn't just looking at 1 or 2 things either. He analyzed 9 major spending categories, covering pretty much the whole shebang of what people spend their money on. He was building a complete, holistic picture of the British consumer across 7 decades. So what was the final verdict? It worked. It actually worked. Deaton's results showed that, contrary to what everyone had thought for decades, consumer behavior in the UK was, in fact, broadly consistent with the rules of demand theory. Both homogeneity and that really strict symmetry rule, they held up. The theory wasn't wrong after all. The old ways of testing it were. And what I think is so cool about this is that his model even explained the small inconsistencies in a very human way. Deaton found that the only time people really seemed to act irrationally was during periods of high inflation, when literally every single price was changing all at once. His take on it? We can handle one or two prices changing just fine, but we tend to get confused and overwhelmed when everything is in flux. Sounds about right, doesn't it?
So Dayton's work did way more than just explain British spending habits. It actually created a brand new standard for how economists do their work, a legacy that is still with us today. He established this core principle that became known as structural coherence. Think of it like this. You can't just throw a mountain of data at a model and hope for the best. Your model has to be built on the solid foundation of theory. The theory is the blueprint that gives all that data structure and meaning. You can't have one without the other.
And the impact was immediate and it was lasting. The paper won the Frisch Medal in 1978, which is one of the highest honors in the field. And even more importantly, it directly paved the way for something called the Almost Ideal Demand System, or AIDS model, which Deaton developed a few years later. And that model became one of the most widely used tools in all of economics for decades to come. So what's the big lesson here at the end of the day? It's really a philosophical one. Before Deaton, economists often saw this trade-off between either sticking rigidly to theory or having a model that actually fits the real-world data. Deaton showed everyone that this was a false choice. Theoretical discipline doesn't hold you back. It gives your data meaning. They aren't enemies. They're partners. And that leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time. Deaton's whole revolution was about using theory to find meaning and structure in data. But today, in our world of AI and machine learning, where we can find patterns in pretty much anything, are we maybe at risk of forgetting the why? Are we just finding endless correlations in the noise without any real human understanding to back it up? Something to think about.